Iris Kettner was 18 years old, had $58.40 folded inside a sock at the bottom of her bag, and had spent 12 years believing her grandfather was a cold, tight-fisted man who had thrown his own daughter into the street and never once looked back. Two of those three things were true. The third one was a lie she had been handed so young that she had never thought to test it, the way you never test whether the floor of your childhood bedroom will hold you. You just walk across it. You trust it because trusting it is easier than doubting it, and because everyone around you walks across it too. She would find out about the lie in a town she had never seen. But first there was the room, and the trash bags, and the last morning of the only life she had known. The apartment on Voss Avenue smelled the way it always had, of wood smoke that had soaked into the plaster over 40 winters and never fully left. Iris had woken at 5 without meaning to. She lay on the pull-out couch that had been her bed since she was 6, and she listened to the building do the things it did in the cold. The tick of the baseboard heater, the groan of the pipes, the soft settling of a house that was about to stop being hers. Above the couch hung a shelf her grandmother had built from a broken door, and on the shelf sat a coffee can full of buttons that Fern had collected for reasons she never explained. Iris had counted those buttons once when she was 9. There were 211 of them. She had never forgotten the number. Her grandmother had been dead for 19 days. Fern Kettner had gone the way she'd lived, without fuss and without warning, sitting in her chair with a cup of tea going cold on the windowsill. She was 74. The funeral had cost more than Iris had, and the church had covered the rest without being asked, which was the first small kindness in a story that would turn out to be built entirely of them, though Iris did not know that yet. She thought kindness was a rare thing. She thought it was something you had to earn, and then hold on to with both hands. At 7, the landlord's son came up the stairs. His name was Dell, and he was not a cruel man, only a tired one with a mortgage and a mother-in-law who needed the unit. He stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, and he did not come in. "I'm sorry about your grandmother," he said. "She was good people, and I hate to do this, but the lease was in her name. You weren't on it. And I've got family that needs the place by the 1st. The 1st was Thursday." Iris said she understood because she did. She had learned early that understanding things was not the same as being able to change them, and that the fastest way through a hard moment was to stop arguing with it. She was already mostly packed. Everything she owned fit into a canvas duffel and a backpack with a strap she had mended twice with fishing line. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, a winter coat that had been Fern's, a paperback field guide to birds that she had checked out of the library so many times the librarian finally just gave it to her, and wrapped in a dish towel, a small tin whistle her grandmother said had belonged to Iris's mother when she was a girl. Her mother, Colleen. Iris did not remember much of her. She remembered a laugh that came too loud in quiet rooms. She remembered the smell of somebody's cigarettes and a car that was always cold. She remembered being handed to Fern on a gray afternoon and the door closing, and then years later, a phone call, and then Fern crying in the kitchen with her back turned so Iris wouldn't see. Colleen had run off from home at 17. She had chased something none of them could name, and it had chased her back, and it had caught her in a motel 2 states away when Iris was 6 years old. Overdose, that was the word the grown-ups used, quietly, the way you'd carry something breakable. What Iris did remember in full was Fern. 12 years of Fern. Her grandmother had raised her on almost nothing, and had never once let her feel it, which is its own kind of art. They had lived on the 2nd floor of the house on Voss Avenue, and heated it with a wood stove that Fern fed herself, splitting kindling in the yard into her 70s. Fern had taught her to mend, to cook a whole week of dinners out of a bag of potatoes and a little pride, to darn a sock so the darn didn't rub, to make a thing last. Nothing in that apartment had ever been new. Everything in it had been kept, and that was the lesson Iris had absorbed so deeply she'd stopped seeing it, the lesson that would make her, without her knowing, the only possible heir to a shop full of old machines and old mercy. You did not throw a thing away because it was old. You kept it working. You kept it warm. Fern had never said much about her husband. When Iris asked about Otto, which she did rarely because it made her grandmother's face close like a door, Fern would only say that he was a hard man who had gone harder after Colleen, and that some griefs turned people to stone, and that it was not for Iris to judge him. Iris had taken that for a warning and judged him anyway, the way children do, filling the silence with the worst story available. And the man who was supposed to have loved Colleen most, her own father, Iris's grandfather Otto, had reportedly said nothing at the funeral, and had died himself 6 years later, alone above a shuttered shop in a copper town Iris had never visited. She had met him exactly twice, the first time she was 7, and he had come down to Voss Avenue on a bus with a paper sack of oranges and sat at the kitchen table and said perhaps 40 words in 3 hours, most of them to Fern, in a low voice, in the other room. The second time she was 11, and he had come to bring her a small wooden box he had made, dovetailed at the corners, sanded smooth, and he had set it in her hands and looked at her for a long moment with an expression she'd been too young to name, and then he had gone, and she had never seen him again. He had died the next year, above his shop, alone. She still had the box. She kept the tin whistle in it. She had thought, all these years, that the box was the only thing he'd ever given her, and that even that had come with no words. Both times he had seemed like a wall, silent, gray, closed. She had built her whole understanding of him out of those 2 visits, and out of the things Fern didn't say, and the shape she'd built was this: a father who let his daughter run into the dark and never went after her. It is a terrible thing to spend 12 years hating the shape of a person, and to learn too late that you built the shape yourself, out of your own fear, in the dark, from the wrong materials. That was the man Iris was thinking about when she carried her bags down to the sidewalk on Voss Avenue and stood in the cold March light and realized she had, in the plainest possible sense, nowhere to go. She walked to the library because it opened at 9 and it was warm, and no one made you leave as long as you were reading. The librarian, Mrs. Okafor, took one look at the duffel and understood everything without being told. Then she said, "Iris, there's a letter for you. Came addressed to you here, care of the library." I thought that was strange, so I held on to it. The envelope was heavy and cream-colored, the kind that meant lawyers. The return address read Okerlund and Pratt, attorneys, and under it a town Iris had to read twice because she'd never heard it spoken aloud. Corbin, Michigan. Inside was a single typed page and, taped to a square of cardboard, an old brass key worn smooth as a river stone. The letter said that her grandfather, Otto Kettner, had died 6 years earlier, which she knew. It said that at the time of his death, he had placed certain property into a trust which she did not know. And it said that the trust named a single beneficiary, and that the property was to pass to that beneficiary on her 18th birthday, which had been the previous Tuesday. The property was described in the flat language of the law as the commercial building and its contents at 12 Heckla Street, Corbin, Michigan, formerly operating as Kettner and Sons Printing. The lawyer had added a line at the bottom, by hand. "He asked me to tell you one thing when the time came. He said, tell her to keep the pot warm. I don't know what it means. Perhaps you will." Iris read it 3 times. The words did not change, but the man behind them did, just slightly, the way a face changes when a cloud moves off it. Otto had left her something. The wall had left her something. She did not know what a person was supposed to feel when a lie they'd carried for 12 years developed its first hairline crack. What she felt was tired, and underneath the tired, a thin bright thread of something she was afraid to call hope, because hope had never once paid off for her. A print shop, closed for years, probably worth nothing. And she needed a door. Mrs. Okafor drove her to the bus station and paid for the ticket over Iris's objections and pressed a paper bag of sandwiches into her hands. Corbin was 7 hours north, up where the land narrowed into a peninsula that reached out into Lake Superior like a finger testing cold water. Iris sat by the window with her duffel on the seat beside her and the brass key in her fist and watched the world change. Farmland gave way to forest. Forest gave way to rock and birch, and the black skeletons of old mine shafts standing against the sky like the ribs of something enormous that had lain down and died. Snow still held in the shadows here even in late March. The air coming through the vents smelled of pine and cold iron. She did not know what she was traveling toward. A worthless building. The ghost of a man she'd been taught to resent. It could be nothing. It could be another dead end in a life that had been mostly dead ends. But the key was real, and the lawyer's note said keep the pot warm, and no one gives a dying instruction about nothing. The bus reached Corbin a little after 4 in the afternoon. It was not a station, just a bench and a sign at the edge of a town that time had folded up and put in a drawer. Iris stepped off into a wind that came straight down the main street off the big lake, and she stood blinking in a light that was already going gold. Corbin had been a copper town once. You could see it in the bones of the place, in the tall brick storefronts, built for a population 3 times the size of the one that remained, in the ornate cornices and the empty upper windows, and the way the whole street seemed to be remembering a party that had ended a century ago. Half the shops were dark, a hardware store hung on. A diner with steamed windows glowed at the far corner. A church raised a green copper steeple, gone the pale mineral color that copper turns when it has given up shining. She found Heckla Street 2 blocks off the main road. Number 12 stood on the corner, a narrow brick building 2 stories tall with a wide front window, and above the door, painted in gold leaf that had mostly flaked away, the words Kettner and Sons Printing. Below that, smaller, job work, letterpress, since 1948. The building was old, but it was not a ruin. The brick was sound. The glass was whole. Someone had swept the step. Iris stood on the sidewalk with her bags and looked at it for a long time, and the longer she looked, the stranger it became, because a building that has been abandoned for years does not look like this. This building looked like it was waiting. Then she saw the light. In the back of the shop, past the front room and its shrouded machines, a window glowed a low, steady red. Not the red of a neon sign, the red of a coal, of a banked fire, of something warm holding on in the dark. It did not flicker. It did not go out. It simply burned, the way it apparently had. She would soon learn, every single night for years, in a building where the electricity had supposedly been shut off long ago. Iris felt the hair rise on her arms. She thought about the 7-hour bus, and the $58, and the fact that the sun was going down, and she had nowhere else on earth to be. She climbed the single stone step, fitted the brass key into the lock, and turned it. The mechanism resisted, then gave with a heavy, satisfying clunk the sound of a lock that has been oiled by someone who cared. She pushed the door open, and the smell reached her first. Not dust, not mildew, not the sour breath of a place gone to rot. What she smelled was ink and machine oil and paper, and underneath it all something metallic and warm, like the air near a wood stove. It was the smell of a shop where someone had been working that very week. The letter said the place had been closed for years. The air said otherwise. She stepped inside. The front room was a print shop out of another century, and it was clean. Not merely preserved, maintained. A long counter ran along one wall, its wood-worn pale where 1,000 hands had leaned. Behind it stood the machines, shrouded in canvas but not forgotten. No dust on the covers, the floor swept, the windows washed. Wooden cabinets with dozens of shallow drawers lined the far wall, and Iris would learn those drawers held type, thousands of tiny lead letters sorted into compartments. A whole alphabet waiting to be arranged into words. A cast iron press the size of a small car stood in the center of the floor, its great flywheel gleaming with oil. And on the walls, framed and yellowing, were the things the shop had printed: wedding announcements, church bulletins, a poster for a copper miners' benefit dance in 1961, the front page of the Corbin Courier from the day the last mine closed, a child's birth notice, a program from a funeral. The whole life of a town, set in lead and pressed into paper, and hung where it could be remembered. Iris walked slowly along the wall, and she was so caught by the framed pages that she did not at first notice the man. He was sitting at the back of the shop on a stool beside the red glowing machine, and he was watching her with an expression she could not read. He was old, past 60, broad through the shoulders in the way of men who have done physical work their whole lives, with a fringe of white hair and hands stained permanently gray at the creases. He wore a leather apron. He did not stand, he did not speak. Iris froze. "Who are you?" she said, and her voice came out smaller than she wanted. The man did not answer. He looked at her mouth, and then he looked at her eyes, and then something moved across his face, a recognition so sudden and complete that it stopped her cold. He raised one gray-stained hand and pointed at her, and then he touched 2 fingers to his own eyes, and then he pointed at the wall behind her, at a small framed photograph she had walked past without seeing. Iris turned. The photograph was of a young woman, maybe 20, standing in the doorway of this very shop with flour or ink or dust on her hands and a wide laughing mouth. She had Iris's exact jaw, Iris's exact stubborn chin, Iris's eyes. It was her mother, Colleen, young and happy and standing in the door of a building Iris had been taught her grandfather had run her mother out. "You look like her," the man's gesture said, though he said it with no words at all. "You look just like her." Iris's knees went soft. She put a hand on the counter and held on. The man rose from his stool. He crossed the shop slowly, and he took a pad of paper from the counter, one of the little job pads printed with the shop's name, and he wrote on it in blocky capital letters and turned it toward her. "My name is Gideon, I am D. I run the press at night. Your grandfather taught me everything. He said you would come." Iris read it twice. Then she wrote back, her hand shaking, the pencil loud in the quiet room. "He said I would come?" Gideon nodded. He took the pad and wrote again. He said, "On her 18th birthday, she will come, and when she does, don't let the pot go cold before she understands." Iris looked at the machine he'd been sitting beside, the source of the red glow. It was tall and complex, a jungle of levers and wheels and a keyboard, and at its heart sat a small crucible, a pot, and inside the pot a low bed of molten metal glowed a steady, sullen red. She could feel the warmth of it from across the room. "That's the light," she said aloud, forgetting he couldn't hear. "That's the ghost. The whole town thinks this place is haunted, and it's just a pot of hot metal." Gideon watched her lips. Whatever he saw there made him smile for the first time, a slow, crooked smile that cracked his weathered face wide open, and he wrote one more line and held it up. "Not a ghost, a linotype. The metal has to stay melted. If it goes cold, it takes a day to warm again, and somebody might need it tonight. Somebody might need it tonight." Iris did not understand that sentence yet. She would. But that night, exhausted, hollowed out, standing in a warm shop that smelled of ink beside a deaf man who had been waiting 6 years for her to walk through the door, she only understood one thing, and it undid every belief she'd carried up that peninsula. The wall had not been a wall. The cold man had left a fire burning for her. Literally. A fire he'd arranged before he died, to be kept alight until his granddaughter came home to understand why. Gideon showed her the back room that night. It held a narrow bed, a hot plate, a small bathroom, and a window that looked out on an alley where snow still clung. Otto had slept here in his last years, Gideon wrote, and Gideon slept here now on the nights the work ran late. There was a second cot folded against the wall. Gideon set it up without being asked, and he made her tea on the hot plate, and he wrote her a note that said, "Get some sleep. Tomorrow I will show you the book." The book. He underlined it twice. Iris lay on the cot in the warm ink-smelling dark and listened to the building. And sometime past midnight she heard it, the sound the whole town called a ghost. A slow, rhythmic, heavy thump-chunk, 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 coming from the front room. The heartbeat at 3 in the morning that had frightened Corbin for years. She got up and looked through the doorway. Gideon was standing at the great iron press, feeding sheets of paper into it one at a time, and the flywheel turned and the jaws of the machine opened and closed and kissed each sheet with a soft, heavy sound, and each sheet came out printed. He worked in the red glow of the pot with total concentration. A deaf man making a sound he could not hear, printing something in the dead middle of the night for reasons Iris did not yet know. She watched him for a long time. There was a rhythm to it that was almost like breathing. The treadle rising and falling, the wheel turning, the paper going in white and coming out marked, and Iris understood dimly that she was watching something older than the town, older than the country, a person and a machine keeping a promise in the dark. On the drying rack beside him, the finished sheets hung in rows, and even from the doorway in the red light, Iris could read the largest word on each one. It said, in heavy black type, "Missing." And below the word was the face of a young man she did not know, and below the face a phone number, and below the number the words, in smaller type, "Last seen near the ferry landing. Please, we just want to know he is alive. Somebody might need it tonight." She understood a little more of the sentence now. Somewhere in Corbin, a mother was awake and Gideon was printing her hope 300 times, so that in the morning she could paper the town with it and feel, for one more day, that she had not given up. He asked her for nothing. He did not even want her to see him do it. He printed her grief at 3 in the morning, so it would be waiting for her, quiet, at her door. Then she went back to bed, and for the first time since her grandmother died, she slept without waking. In the morning, Gideon showed her the book. It lived in the bottom drawer of the roll-top desk in the back office, wrapped in oilcloth to keep the damp off. It was a ledger, thick as a Bible, its cover soft black leather worn gray at the corners, its spine cracked and mended with tape. On the first page, in a careful upright hand, Someone had written a date 34 years earlier, and beneath it a single word: jobs. Iris turned the pages, and at first she understood it as exactly what it appeared to be: a printer's record of work. Each line held a date, a customer, a description of the job, and a price. 500 wedding invitations, $40. Church bulletins, weekly, $6. Business cards, letterhead, raffle tickets, auction bills, the ordinary paper of a small town's ordinary life, all recorded in Otto Kettner's tight, careful hand, year after year after year. But then she noticed the second column. Because next to a great many of the entries, the price was not a number. Next to a great many of the entries in the same careful hand, Otto had written a single word, and the word was waived. Iris slowed down. She started reading the descriptions of those particular jobs. Funeral cards, Hallinan family waived, and in the margin, smaller, no one else would bury him. He had $4.80. I did not take it. Missing person posters, 200 copies, Vainio girl waived. And in the margin, she is 19, last seen at the ferry. Memorial program, infant, Sundberg, waived. Notice of eviction hearing, translated to Spanish, Reyes family, waived. And beside it, they didn't know the date, now they know the date. Reward flyer, lost dog, child's dog, waived. And beside that, the smallest note of all. The boy cried harder than any of the grown men who come in here. Funeral cards, waived. Missing posters, waived. Wedding announcement, waived, and in the margin, her father won't pay for it, so I will. Discharge papers reprinted, veteran, Koski waived, his burned in the house fire, and the VA wanted $40. Waived, 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 34 years of it, hundreds of lines, a second secret business running quietly alongside the first, and this one never took a cent, and this one, Iris understood, was the real business, and the paying jobs had only ever been the thing that kept it alive. She noticed something else as she read. Otto never wrote a word about himself in that book. He never wrote generous, or gave, or helped. He wrote the facts, the date, the name, the number of copies, and then, in the margin, one plain sentence about the person, so that they would not be a number even to him. A whole life of charity, and not one line of it was about the man doing the charity. He had scrubbed himself out of his own good book on purpose, the way you'd wipe your fingerprints off something you wanted to belong to everyone. Iris sat down hard in the desk chair. Her grandfather had spent 34 years printing, for free, the paper that desperate people needed and could not afford. When a family was too poor to put a death notice in the paper, so their dead would have gone into the ground, with no name printed anywhere in the world. Otto printed the funeral cards for nothing, so that at least the name existed on paper, so that at least someone could hold it. When a mother's child vanished, and she had no money, and no help, and nothing but a photograph and a wild hope, Otto printed her 200 missing posters at 3 in the morning and asked for nothing, and Gideon, she now understood, still did, because somebody might need it tonight. Before I tell you what Iris found on the next page, I have to stop for just 1 second, because if a story like this one means something to you, it would mean a great deal to us if you'd take a moment to subscribe and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. These stories only find the people who need them when you help carry them. Now, back to Iris and the page she almost didn't turn. She kept reading. She read for an hour, and Gideon brought her tea and left her alone with it, and the pages went by, and the town's whole hidden sorrow scrolled past under her fingers, and its whole hidden mercy too, because for every private grief in that book there was a man who had answered it with the only thing he had, which was a machine that made names permanent. And then she reached a line, dated 18 years earlier, and the world tilted. Missing person posters, 300 copies, and the customer's name, written in Otto's hand, was Otto Kettner himself. And the description in the margin said, "My daughter, Colleen, last seen Duluth, reward, anything," and below it, no price, no waived even. Just 3 words pressed so hard into the paper that the pen had nearly torn through. Bring her home. Iris made a sound she didn't recognize as her own. She turned the page. There was another. Dated the year after. Missing posters, Colleen, 300 copies, and the page after that, the year after that, the same. And the page after that, and the page after that. Every year, on the same week in spring for 6 years, until the year her mother died, when Iris was 6 years old, and then one final entry, the ink blurred where something had fallen on it and dried. Colleen, no more posters. Funeral cards, 50 waived. Pressed the first one myself, could not do the rest. Gideon finished them. Iris understood then the full and terrible shape of it. The story she had been told was that Otto let his daughter run into the dark and never went after her. The truth, written in his own hand, was that he had gone after her the only way a printer knew how. He could not chase her across 2 states. He could not drag her out of the places she'd gone, but he could print her face 300 times a year, every year, and paper the ferry docks and the bus stations and the county line with his daughter's eyes, and beg 2 words of the whole cold North Country: bring her home. She had never come home. And a grieving man, unable to save his own child, had turned his grief outward and spent the rest of his life making sure that no one else's child, no one else's dead, no one else's vanished mother would be left without a name printed somewhere in the world. He had not been a wall. He had been a man carrying a weight so heavy he could not speak of it, and he had carried it by lifting other people's. Iris put her head down on the open book and wept, and she wept for a long time. And Gideon stood in the doorway and did not try to stop her, because he was a man who understood that some things a person has to set down slowly. When she could speak again, she wrote him a note. Why didn't anyone tell me who he was? Gideon read it. He took the pencil and he thought a while, and then he wrote, because he never told anyone either. He said charity you took about isn't charity. It's just noise. He said the only gift that counts is the one that cost you your name being known for it. And then, underneath, not all of it, but the ones he helped knew. They just kept it like he did. Quiet, the ones he helped knew. Iris did not have to wait long to learn how many that was. It started the next morning with a knock at the front door. A woman stood on the step, 60 or so, broad-shouldered, in an apron dusted with flour. Behind her, across and down the street, Iris could see the diner with its steamed windows, and a hand-painted sign that read Marjorie's, pasties and pie. You must be the granddaughter, the woman said. I'm Marjorie. I run the pasty shop. Gideon came and told me you were here. Well, he wrote it down. She held up a covered dish. I brought you something hot. You look like you haven't had a real meal since you got off that bus. Iris let her in. Marjorie moved through the shop the way a person moves through a church they've prayed in their whole life, with familiarity and a little bit of awe, and her eyes went to the framed pages on the wall, and then to the red glow of the pot in the back, and she dotted like she was greeting an old friend. Still burning, she said. Good. She set the dish on the counter. Then she looked at Iris for a long moment and said, You don't know, do you? You don't know what this place was. I'm starting to, Iris said. Marjorie pulled a stool up to the counter and sat, and she told her. In 1994, Marjorie said, her husband had walked out and left her with 2 kids, and a failing diner and a stack of bills she couldn't read the bottom of. She'd gone under, lost the diner, and in the worst of it, when she couldn't afford to bury her own mother who'd died that winter. She had come to this shop, not to ask, she'd been too proud to ask, but just because Otto had printed her wedding invitations years before, and she thought maybe he'd give her a discount on the cheapest funeral card he had. He didn't give me a discount, Marjorie said. He looked at me over those little glasses of his and he said, Marjorie, this one's already paid for. And I said, by who? And he said, by nobody. That's how it works. And he print my mother the finest card you ever saw. Creamstock gold edge, a little sprig of pine because she loved the woods. And he wrote her name so beautiful, and when I tried to pay him back the next year, when I got back on my feet, he wouldn't take it. He said if I had extra I should go help somebody who was where I'd been. So I did. I've been doing it for 30 years. Marjorie's eyes were wet. She wiped them with the back of her flour-dusted hand. That's how the whole town runs, honey, she said. He started it, 1 card at a time. Nobody talks about it because he asked us not to. But you go up and down this street, and every 3rd door, somebody's got a card in a drawer with a name on it they couldn't have paid to print. And they remember. Believe me, they remember. By that afternoon they had started to come. It was as if the town had been holding its breath for 6 years, waiting to see whether the shop would live or die, and Marjorie's word had gone out, and now the door of Kettner and Sons opened and opened and opened. An old miner with black-scared hands came and stood in the doorway and took off his cap and said Otto printed the union notices free during the strike of '82, and he'd never forgotten it. A young father came holding a toddler and said Otto had printed the missing posters for his little sister 30 years ago. And though they'd never found her, having those posters, having done something, was the only thing that had kept his mother alive that year. A woman came with a funeral card in a plastic sleeve, worn soft from handling, and she held it up and said, "My son," and could not say anything else, and Iris understood. A woman in a nurse's smock came on her lunch break and did not sit down. She said her name was Sophia Reyes, and that her family had come to the copper country 20 years ago to work, and that when her father was going to be put out of their rented house over a hearing none of them could read, in a language none of them yet spoke. It was Otto who had printed the notice out plainly, in Spanish and in English, with the date circled, so they knew when to appear and what to say. They had kept the house. Sophia was a nurse now because of it, she said. She had named her daughter Fern, after the woman who used to bring Otto his supper, though she'd never told anyone that, and she wept when she said it, and Iris wept too, because she had not known her grandmother's name lived in a child across town. An old man came who could barely climb the step, and he brought nothing but a slip of paper folded to the softness of cloth, and he unfolded it with shaking hands to show Iris a single printed line, a name and 2 dates, a life measured in a dash between them. "My wife," he said, 61 years. I couldn't afford to tell the paper she was gone. Otto made me this so she'd be printed somewhere. He said everyone deserves to be printed somewhere. The old man looked around the shop, at the machines, at the pot. "Is it true?" he asked. "Is it true a girl's going to keep it going?" "Because I'm 88, and when I go, there'll be no one to print me." And Iris took his hand and said yes. "Yes, it's true. There will be someone to print you." And the old man nodded and could not speak, and went back out into the cold lighter than he'd come in. They did not come to take anything. They came to tell her. Each of them stood in the shop where their grief had once been answered, and they gave Iris the story of it, one name at a time, and by evening Iris understood that she had not inherited a worthless building. She had inherited a debt the whole town had been quietly repaying for 34 years, and now it was hers to keep. That night she asked Gideon to teach her. He started with the linotype, the machine with the burning heart. He showed her how you sat at the keyboard, and how each key released a small brass mold, a matrix, and how the machine assembled a line of them, and how the molten metal from the glowing pot flooded the molds and hardened in an instant into a solid line of type, a slug, cast fresh for each line and melted back down when you were done. That was why the pot had to stay hot. Cold metal cast nothing. A cold pot meant a silent shop, and a silent shop meant that the next mother who came at midnight with a photograph and no money would find the door locked and the fire out. "Keep the pot warm," Iris said, and Gideon read her lips and nodded, and pointed at her, and then pointed at his own chest, and then made a small circling gesture that took in the whole shop, the whole town, the whole 34 years. "Now you," the gesture said. "Now it's yours." Iris learned to set type by hand for the small jobs, standing at the type case, her fingers finding the letters in their worn compartments, building words upside down and backward the way every printer since Gutenberg had done it. She learned to ink the press and time the flywheel and pull a clean impression. She burned her fingers on the pot, and gray stained the creases of her hands until they looked like Gideon's, like Otto's, and she found, to her surprise, that the work quieted something in her that had been loud her whole life. Her hands knew what to do. Her hands, it turned out, had been waiting for this without knowing it, the way she'd been waiting for a door. Gideon taught her the way a man teaches who cannot use his voice, which is to say slowly, with his hands, and with a patience that never once curdled into frustration. When she pied a whole tray of type, dumping a job's careful setting into a chaos of loose letters on the floor, he did not sigh or scold. He crouched down beside her and began sorting the letters back into their compartments one at a time, and after a while he wrote her a note that said, "Otto did this the first week too. Worse. He spilled the cap Q." And Iris laughed, and it was the first time she had laughed in the shop, and Gideon watched her face and smiled his crooked smile, because he could see a laugh even if he could not hear one. He taught her the creed too, though it took him 3 nights of notes to say it. He wrote that Otto used to tell him a job was never just a job, that when a man brought in his business cards, you set them straight and clean, because his living depended on people taking him seriously, and a crooked card said careless. That when a family brought in a funeral, you gave it the best stock in the shop, because it was the last thing anyone would ever print with that name on it, and the last thing should be the finest thing. "Nothing we make is small," Gideon wrote, in his blocky capitals, and underlined it. "Everything we make is the most important thing in someone's day." and Iris copied that sentence onto a card and pinned it above the typed case, where it still hangs. She had been in Corbin 11 days when the black SUV pulled up outside. It parked at the curb with its engine running, too clean for that road, and a man got out who did not belong to the copper country. He was in his mid-40s, in a coat that cost more than the bus that had brought Iris north, with a haircut that had never seen the wind off Lake Superior. He came up the step and through the door without knocking, already smiling, already reaching out a hand. "Chase Renner," he said. "You must be the young lady who inherited all this." He said all this the way you'd say all this mess. His eyes went around the shop, over the machines, the type cabinets, the framed pages, and Iris watched him fail to see any of it, watched him see only square footage and a corner lot. "Corner of Heckla and 3rd, he said, almost to himself. "Best position in town." He explained, with a development group out of Marquette. They were putting together a lakefront project, condominiums, a marina, a restaurant, the kind of thing that would bring money and jobs and life back to a town that badly needed all three. He said it like he'd said it 100 times, and probably he had. And Corbin was going to happen, he said, with them or without them, and the only question was whether the people who owned key parcels wanted to be smart about it. "And this," he said, tapping the counter, "is a key parcel." He named a number, $46,500. Iris said nothing. $46,500 was more money than she had ever imagined touching. It was a car and an apartment and college and the end of counting change. It was the difference between the girl on the bus with $58 and a girl with a life. She felt the weight of it land on her, and she understood, in that moment, exactly how the temptation was supposed to work. Renner saw her hesitate and pressed. "Look," he said, gently reasonably. "I'm not the bad guy here. You're 18. You didn't ask for a dead print shop in a dying town. You've got no money, am I right? No family. This is a gift. Take the check, go live your life. Let me turn this old fire trap into something that actually helps people." He gestured at the framed pages, the machines, the whole quiet church of the place. "Nobody prints on lead anymore, sweetheart. This is a museum for a world that's gone." And then he made his mistake. He looked at the red glow of the pot in the back, and he said, "And that thing's a fire hazard. That has to go first thing. That thing. That fire that a dying man had arranged to keep burning so his granddaughter would understand. That fire that Gideon fed at 3 in the morning, so that grief always had a door open to it. That thing." "I'll need some time to think," Iris said. Renner's smile didn't waver, but something behind it did. "Of course," he said. "Take your time. But I should be straight with you, because I respect you." He set a business card on the counter, and beside it a folded document. "My firm has already acquired the 3 adjacent parcels, the towns behind the project, and there are ordinances, sweetheart, code compliance, historical structure requirements, a building this old that's been operating without permits, running an open flame, housing people overnight without a residential license." He let it sit. "I'd hate to see you inherit a stack of fines you can't pay. It'd be a shame to lose the place to the county over paperwork. So much cleaner to just take the check." He left. The SUV pulled away, and Iris stood in the shop, holding a threat dressed up as a favor, and for the first time, she was afraid, because she was 18 and alone, and Renner was right about one thing. She had no money. She could not fight fines. She could not fight lawyers. $58.40 did not fight anything. She called the lawyer, Okerlund. She told him what Renner had said. There was a pause on the line, and then the old lawyer said something that changed everything. "Miss Kettner," he said, "your grandfather came to see me in 1991. That's 34 years ago. He was not a wealthy man, and he was not, forgive me, an educated one, but he was one of the shrewdest clients I ever had, and he saw this coming. He saw it 30 years before it arrived. I think you'd better come to my office. Bring nothing. It's all already been done. Before you find out what Otto Kettner did in 1991, I want to say one thing, because we're at the part of the story that matters most. If you've made it this far, you already understand that this was never really about a building. So do me a small favor. Hit subscribe, and let somebody in your life know they're not as alone as they think they are. Now." The lawyer's office, and the thing Otto set in motion 3 decades before Chase Renner ever heard of Corbin. Okerlund's office was above the hardware store, up a flight of stairs that leaned. He was a small, dry man of 80 who moved slowly and spoke precisely, and he had a folder ready on the desk when Iris came in, a folder that had been ready, she realized, for years. In 1991, he said, "Your grandfather did 3 things, and any one of them would have stopped a man like Renner, but together they are a wall no developer on earth can climb." He laid the papers out one at a time. First, he said, Otto did not leave you the building. He left it to a charitable trust that he created and named you as the trustee. You don't own it, you steward it. And the trust's charter, which cannot be amended, says that the ground floor of 12 Heckla Street must operate in perpetuity as a community print shop, providing, at no cost, funerary and memorial printing and public notice printing for residents unable to pay. Okerlund looked at her over his glasses. A trust with a charitable purpose written into it like that cannot be dissolved for private profit. Not by you, not by a court, not by Mr. Renner and his condominiums. The purpose is protected. The building serves the purpose or it serves no one forever. Iris stared at the page. Second, Okerlund said, and slid another document forward. In 1991, Otto placed a preservation easement on the structure and recorded it with the county. That means the historical character of the building is legally protected and runs with the land itself. It doesn't matter who owns the parcel. Anyone who buys it buys the easement too. They cannot demolish it. They cannot gut it. Renner told you it's a historical structure with requirements. He was trying to use that against you. Okerlund almost smiled. Your grandfather made sure it would only ever work in your favor. And third, the old man said, and this is the part I've waited 6 years to tell someone. In 1991, Otto also established an endowment. A small one. He was not rich, but he put aside what he could every year, every single year, for 30 years, and he invested it carefully, and he directed that its income be used for exactly 2 things. To pay the utilities and the taxes and the maintenance on the shop, so it can never be lost over a bill, and to pay a modest wage to whoever keeps it running. He turned the last page toward her. It was an account statement. The number at the bottom was not a fortune, but it was enough to run a small shop and pay a small wage and keep a pot warm indefinitely. He was afraid, Okerlund said quietly, that after he was gone, the shop would fall to exactly the kind of pressure Mr. Renner is applying. A hungry heir, a fat check, a dying town desperate for any investment. So he made it impossible. He made the kindness stronger than the greed. He spent the last 30 years of his life building a wall around a fire so that no one could ever put it out, including you, Miss Kettner, on a weekday. Even you cannot sell it. He loved you enough to take the temptation out of your hands before you ever had them. Iris could not speak. There is one more thing, Okerlund said. He asked me to give it to you only if someone ever came trying to buy the shop. He said, if that day comes, she'll be tempted, and she should have this before she decides anything. He handed her a single sheet of paper. It was a page torn from the ledger, from the free column, and it was old, the ink faded, the date some 40 years past, before the shop's own job book even began, copied out by Otto in his careful hand from an older record. And it read, funeral cards, waived. Renner family, the boy's mother, they had nothing. Press them Sunday so the boy would have something with her name on it. He was 6. He stood in the shop and watched the press and did not cry. Someday that boy will be a man and he will not remember this. But the paper will. Iris read it 3 times. The boy was 6. He stood in the shop and watched the press and did not cry. Chase Renner. The man in the coat that cost more than $1. The man who called the fire a fire hazard. His mother had died when he was 6 years old and family had been too poor to print her name. And Otto Kettner had pressed her funeral cards for nothing on a Sunday so that a 6-year-old boy would have something in the world with his mother's name on it. And that boy had grown to a man who came back 40 years later to bulldoze the only place that had ever shown his family mercy. Because forgetting was meet himself forget. Because forgetting was easier than carrying it. But the paper remembered. Otto had known it would. Iris understood then what her grandfather had handed her. Not a weapon. A choice. She could have destroyed Chase Renner. She could have stood in front of the town he wanted to develop and read that page aloud and watched him crumble, watched the polished man break open in public over the mother he'd buried in poverty. It would have been justice of a rough kind. It would have felt for about a minute very good. She did not do that. She thought about a man who spent 34 years making sure that no gift was ever loud, that no kindness ever cost the person who received it their dignity, that the only charity worth doing was the kind that didn't need your name attached to it. She thought about what it would mean to take this old mercy, done quietly for a frightened child, and turn it into a public blade. It would be a betrayal of the very thing the ledger was. It would make her grandfather's fire into a fire that burned people. So instead, when Renner came back 3 days later, checkbook out, lawyer CC'd, sure of himself, Iris did not raise her voice. She said, "I can't sell you the shop, Mr. Renner. Not because I don't want to, because it's legally impossible. It's held in a charitable trust with a protected purpose and a recorded easement, and no one can dissolve it or demolish it. Not me, not you, not the county. Your firm's lawyers can confirm it by Friday. I'm sorry you already bought the other parcels." She watched him go pale, watched the deal die in his eyes. And then she did the thing she had decided to do. The thing that was harder and better than revenge. She said, "Before you go, there's something in the shop that belongs to you, not to sell, to keep." And she took him to the back, past the pot burning its steady red, and she opened the ledger, not to the page Okerlund had given her. She'd put that away, but to a clean page. And while Renner watched, uncomprehending, she set to line of type by hand, the way Gideon had taught her, her fingers finding the letters, and she cast it and inked the small press and pulled one single card. It was a memorial card, cream stock, and on it in beautiful type she had set only a name, his mother's name. She'd found it in the old record. Iris handed it to him. "My grandfather printed these for your family a long time ago," she said, "when you were 6. He never told anyone. That's how he did things. I just thought you should have a fresh one, in case the old one wore out." Chase Renner stood in the red glow of the pot, holding a card with his dead mother's name on it, printed by an 18-year-old girl in a shop he'd come to destroy, and something in his face that had been locked for 40 years came open, and this time the 6-year-old boy cried. He cried the way you cry when a grief you've been running from your whole life finally catches you in a warm room that smells of ink. And there is nothing to do but let it. He did not build his condominiums. He sold the adjacent parcels to the town at cost, and the town made them into a park, and there is a bench in that park, now with a small brass plaque that says only, "For the ones who had nothing," and most people who sit on it do not know what it means, which is exactly how Otto would have wanted it. Iris stayed. Of course she stayed. There was never really any question after the ledger. She learned the trade through that first spring and summer, Gideon teaching her with his blocky notes and his gray hands, and by autumn she could run every machine in the shop, and by the following year the door of Kettner and Sons was open 6 days a week. She took the paying jobs, the wedding invitations, and the church bulletins, and the auction bills, because the paying jobs kept the lights on and honored the honest half of the ledger. And she kept the other column too. When a family came who could not pay, she printed their funeral cards for nothing and would not hear otherwise, and she pressed the finest cards she knew how to make, cream stock, a sprig of pine, the name set beautiful, because a name deserves to be beautiful. When a mother came at midnight with a photograph and a terror, Iris and Gideon fired the press and ran the missing posters, 300 copies, and asked for nothing, and did not go to bed until they were done, because somebody might need them tonight. The morning she reopened for real, the first paying morning, she was terrified no one would come, and by 10 o'clock there was a line out the door onto Heckla Street. Not because the town needed print work, exactly. A town of that size does not generate a line for business cards. They came because the shop was open, because the light in the window was theirs again, because for 6 years they had walked past a dark building that had once been the warmest place many of them had ever stood, and now it was warm again, and they wanted to stand in it. An old woman ordered stationery she would never write on. A farmer ordered raffle tickets for a raffle that did not yet exist. They came to be in the room. Iris understood this and printed every meaningless job as if it were the most important thing in someone's day, because Gideon had told her it was, and because for these people, that morning it was. Marjorie sent people across the street when her tables were full, and once a month she and Iris cooked in the shop's little kitchen after closing and argued about pie. The old miner with the black-scared hands came every Tuesday and just sat by the pot, warming his ruined joints, telling Iris stories about the strike of '82 until she knew them by heart. Sophia Reyes brought her daughter Fern to see the machines, and the little girl pressed her own name on a scrap of paper and carried it home like treasure. The town folded around her the way it had folded around Otto, quietly, completely, the way copper country closes around its own. And slowly, over that first year, Iris stopped being the girl off the bus with $58 and became, without any ceremony to mark the change, the printer on Heckla Street. People started saying it like a fact of the town. Go see the printer, she'll fix you up. She won't let you pay if you can't. Just like the old man. Just like the old man. The first time she heard someone say it, she had to go into the back and stand by the pot until her eyes cleared, because it was the only inheritance she had ever wanted, and she had not known it until she had it. On a cold night the following winter, the door opened and a boy came in. He was maybe 17, thin, in a jacket too light for the peninsula, and he stood just inside the door with his hands shoved in his pockets and his eyes moving over everything, weighing it, checking it for danger, the way you learn to weigh a room when no room has ever been safe. Iris knew that look. She had worn it off a bus 11 months before. She had worn it in 7 foster placements before that, in a group home, in the worst nights of a life that had taught her kindness was rare and had to be earned and held with both hands. She knew now that the last part was a lie. Kindness was not rare. It was just quiet. It was everywhere all the time, running underneath the noise of the world like the warm metal in the pot, waiting for someone to need it. "Are you hungry?" she asked the boy. He nodded, once warily. "Sit down," she said, and pointed at the stool by the pot, the warm one, Gideon's one. "And when you've eaten, if you want, I could use a hand around here. Can't pay much yet. But it's warm, and there's a cot, and nobody here is going to ask you anything you don't want to answer." The boy looked at her like the offer might bite. She recognized that too. When you have been let down enough times, a kindness feels like the top of a trap, and the only sane response is to look for the hinge. Iris did not rush him. She went and warmed a bowl of Marjorie's soup and set it down on the counter and went back to her typecase, and let the boy decide, in his own time, whether the room was safe, the way you let a frightened animal come to the food. She did not watch him. Watching would have made it a test, and he had failed enough tests. She just worked and let the shop do what the shop did, which was be warm and smell of ink and ask nothing. After a while she heard the stool scrape. Then he sat down by the fire. That night, after the boy was asleep on the cot in the back, and Gideon had gone home and the shop was quiet, Iris took the ledger out of the roll-top desk and unwrapped it from its oilcloth. She turned past 34 years of names, past the funeral cards and the missing posters, and the waved and the waved and the waved, past her grandfather's last blurred entry about a daughter who never came home, past the 6 years Gideon had kept it going alone, to the first clean line on the newest page. And she picked up the pen, and in her own hand, still learning to be careful, still learning to be beautiful, she wrote the date, and then she wrote her name. Iris Kettner, trustee, and under it, because it seemed right, because it was the truest thing she knew, she wrote the boy's dinner as the first entry of her tenure. Warm meal, one boy, no name yet, waved, and in the margin, small the way Otto had done it. He watched the press and did not cry. "I'll leave the light on for him." Then she checked the pot. The metal glowed its steady sullen red in the dark, warm and ready, the way it had glowed every night for 34 years, through Otto's grief and Gideon's silence and a whole town's quiet remembering, and would glow now through hers. Somewhere out in the cold dark of the peninsula, there was another lost mother with a photograph, another poor family with a name they couldn't afford to print, another kid off another bus with nowhere on earth to be. She did not know when they would come. But when they did, the door would be unlocked, and the fire would be hot, and the type would be waiting in its worn compartments, and someone with gray-stained hands would set their sorrow into lead, and make it permanent, and hand it back and ask for nothing. Because that was the inheritance. Not the building, not the money, not even the machines. The inheritance was the understanding that a legacy is not what you own. A legacy is what you refuse to let go cold. It is the funeral card pressed on a Sunday so a 6-year-old has his mother's name. It is the poster run at 3 a.m. for a stranger's vanished child. It is the fire that a broken man arranges to keep burning after his death, so that his granddaughter, arriving with nothing, will understand that she was never really poor, and never really alone, and never really the last of anything. And here is the thing Iris came to know. The thing she would have told you if you had sat with her by that pot, the plainest lesson pressed out of all of it. We do not get to choose most of what happens to us. Otto could not choose whether his daughter came home. Iris could not choose whether her grandmother lived or her mother stayed, or the lease had her name on it. Marjorie could not choose the winter that took her mother and her diner in the same year. What we get to choose is smaller than that, and stronger than that. We get to choose what we do with the grief once it's ours. You can let a sorrow turn you to stone, the way the town believed Otto had. Or you can take the exact weight of it, the precise shape of the thing that broke you, and you can spend the rest of your life making sure it breaks no one else the same way. Otto could not find his own missing girl, so he made certain no other family searched alone. That is not a happy ending. It is a better thing than a happy ending. It is grief, redeemed, handed forward, kept warm. It is the only kind of resurrection most of us will ever get to perform, and it is available to anyone at any time for the price of not looking away. Iris turned off the office light. She did not turn off the pot. You never turn off the pot. She stood a moment in the red glow, in the smell of ink and warm metal, in the quiet of a shop that a whole town had kept breathing until she could come home to it. "Keep the pot warm," she said, to no one, to everyone, to a gray-eyed man she had spent 12 years misunderstanding and one spring learning to love. Then she went to bed, and the fire burned, and the door stayed unlocked, and somewhere a mother she had not met yet was already, without knowing it, on her way.